It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at the downtown branch of Jefferson Savings Bank. The sun was just beginning to peek through the windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. The usual hum of office chatter filled the air, mixed, with the clinking of keyboards and the occasional ringing of phones. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another day at the bank. But then the door swung open. A man shuffled in, slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. He was old, his face deeply lined with years of experience, his skin a dark, weathered shade that spoke of decades spent in the sun. He wore a tattered brown coat, the kind you'd find at a thrift store, and in his right hand he carried a large, worn-out sack, bulging with who knows what. The employees behind the counter barely looked up. It wasn't unusual to see people coming in and out of the bank, but this man, he was different. His appearance alone made some of the younger tellers glance at each other, exchanging snickers. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a bank, not this bank. "Can I help you, sir?" Jenna, the teller at the front desk, asked, raising an eyebrow. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he shuffled forward, his old shoes making a faint scuffing sound against the tile. Jenna glanced down at the sack in his hand. The man's slow, deliberate movements and the mysterious bundle caught her attention, but she quickly pushed her curiosity aside. She wasn't here to entertain strange customers. She cleared her throat. "Sir, if you need to make a deposit or a withdrawal, you can just step up to the counter." One of the other tellers, Sarah, stifled a laugh. "What's he got in that sack, you think? Probably just some junk he's trying to get rid of." Jenna chuckled along with her, a bit too loudly, but then her smile faded as the man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the counter, as if he hadn't heard her, or maybe he just didn't care. "Do you need something, sir?" Jenna repeated, now slightly more annoyed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the old man looked up. His eyes were dark, pools of emotion buried, deep beneath layers of history. He gave a small nod but said nothing. He simply stepped up to the counter, placing the sack gently down with a soft thud. Jenna blinked. Was he going to open it here? She couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The man's voice broke the silence, raspy and slow. "I need to speak to the manager." Jenna hesitated, not sure whether to roll her eyes or get her manager. She was about to speak when Sarah leaned over from her desk, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, because the manager would totally be interested in what's in your sack." The man didn't respond. He simply stood there waiting. For a moment, the room felt off. The usual rhythm of the bank had been broken. The whispers among the employees faded as they watched the old man. Something about him didn't sit right, something unsettling, though none of them could quite put their finger on it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jenna hesitated for a second, her hand hovering over the phone, ready to call the manager. But something about the man's stillness, the way he stood there, calmly waiting, held her back. She glanced at Sarah, who was now leaning in, eyes narrowed with curiosity. "You think we should call security?" Sarah whispered, still eyeing the sack. Jenna shook her head, unsure. "Let's just get the manager. It's probably nothing." But even as she spoke, a sense of unease crept up her spine. The man's eyes were unreadable, distant, like he was lost in a world of his own. She pressed the intercom button. "James, can you come up here for a moment? I think we might have a situation." Moments later, James, the branch manager, appeared from the back office. He was in his mid-30s, tall, with a sharp suit and an even sharper demeanor. He looked at Jenna, then at the old man who hadn't moved an inch since his arrival. "Is everything okay?" James asked, his voice cool, professional. "I'm not sure," Jenna replied, her eyes darting to the sack. "This man came in asking to speak with you. He doesn't seem to be making much sense." James took a step closer, his eyes briefly scanning the old man, who seemed to have settled into an almost meditative stillness. James wasn't sure if it was the sack or the strange air around him, but something felt off. He cleared his throat. "Sir, how can I help you?" The old man's eyes flickered for a second before he slowly looked up. His voice, when it came, was slow but firm, carrying a weight that seemed to resonate. "I need to speak to the person in charge." James raised an eyebrow, glancing at Jenna. "I am the manager of this branch. What can I do for you?" The old man stood there for a long moment, not replying immediately. The bank's soft background hum of activity continued around them, but there was a growing tension in the air. Finally, the old man reached into the sack and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The action was so deliberate, so quiet, that it felt almost like a secret being revealed. He placed the envelope on the counter, pushing it toward James. The old man's weathered hands trembled slightly, but his eyes never wavered from James. Without speaking, James picked up the envelope, inspecting it for any signs of identification or return address. It was plain, unmarked. He tore it open carefully, pulling out a thick stack of papers. As he flicked through them, his brows furrowed in confusion. "What is this?" James asked, his voice a little less confident than before. The man's expression remained unreadable. "That is the paperwork for the full ownership of this bank." James blinked, the words not quite registering. "Excuse me?" The old man looked directly at him, and this time there was a glint in his eye, something that wasn't quite a challenge, but rather a quiet, undeniable truth. "I am the owner of this bank. I own Jefferson Savings Bank." For a second, time seemed to stand still. Jenna and Sarah exchanged confused glances, both of them struggling to process what they had just heard. James's hand tightened around the papers in his grip, as if expecting the words to change once he looked away and came back to them. But they didn't. "Sir, I think you must be mistaken," James said, the polite tone still intact, but now tinged with a hint of disbelief. "Jefferson Savings Bank has been under the ownership of the Mitchell family for generations. There's no way—" The old man's gaze hardened, and he stepped closer to the counter. "The Mitchells no longer own this bank. I do." Jenna looked from the old man to James, her thoughts racing. Was this some kind of joke, a prank, the way he was speaking? It didn't make sense. Can you prove it?" James asked, trying to remain composed, though the unease was creeping into his voice. The old man gave a small nod and slowly reached into the sack again. This time he pulled out a set of keys, golden and engraved with the initials JSB. He slid them across the counter to James. James stared at them, his mouth dry. The reality of the situation was starting to hit him, and his brain scrambled for answers that didn't exist. The papers, the keys, everything felt so final. "Are you telling me," James began slowly, "that you're the one who bought the bank?" The old man nodded once. "I did." Silence hung in the air as James processed the weight of what he had just heard. This wasn't just some elderly man with a sack full of old papers and keys. This was the new owner of the bank, the very institution that James had worked his entire career for. The realization settled over him like a heavy cloak, one he couldn't shake off. Jenna and Sarah stood motionless, eyes wide with disbelief. They hadn't known what to expect when the old man walked through the door, but this certainly wasn't it. As James fumbled with the papers, trying to make sense of the situation, the old man took a step back, his presence looming over them like a quiet storm. He had just quietly shattered the illusion of the familiar world they had known. James glanced up, his voice now uncertain. "Why didn't you tell us who you were when you came in?" The old man's lips curled into a slight smile, one that held no malice but was rich with the weight of experience. "I wanted to see how you'd treat me." Jenna felt a knot form in her stomach. She could barely meet the man's gaze, knowing how she had treated him earlier, how they all had. Their laughter, their dismissal of him, had all been a mistake. But it was too late to undo it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The weight of what had just transpired hung heavily in the air. James stood frozen, staring at the papers and the keys in his hands, as if they might transform into something else at any moment. He glanced over at Jenna and Sarah, who were both looking at the old man with wide eyes, equal parts stunned and embarrassed. The silence in the room was thick, as if time had slowed down to allow the reality of the situation to sink in. The murmurs from the other customers waiting in line faded into the background, unnoticed by the staff, who were too caught up in this surreal encounter. "You "You can't be serious," James finally managed to say, his voice barely above, a whisper, the disbelief still clouding his words. "You really own the bank now?" The old man nodded, his expression unreadable. "I do. The Mitchells sold the bank to me a month ago. You should have received the notification." James's eyes darted to the corner of the room, where a bulletin board with important notices was posted. But of course he had seen nothing like that. The Mitchell family was legendary in this town, and the idea that they had sold the bank to this old man seemed impossible. Jenna's mind raced. She remembered the conversations in the break room about the Mitchells, how they were planning to retire soon, how rumors of selling the bank had circulated for months, but no one had expected a change of ownership to happen so suddenly, and certainly not to someone like this man. I don't believe you," James muttered, his voice shaking slightly now. "How could they sell to you without us knowing?" The old man's lips twitched, almost in amusement. "Business is business. The Mitchells saw fit to hand over ownership, and now it belongs to me." His eyes met James's with a quiet intensity. "You might want to take a closer look at those papers, James. You'll find everything you need to understand who I am and what I now own." James slowly turned back to the papers, his fingers trembling as he skimmed the legal jargon. The words were clear enough. The deal was legitimate. It was all there in black and white. Suddenly, Jenna felt her stomach drop. She realized something she hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just an old man walking in off the street with an odd sack. This was the man who now held the reins to their futures. He could change everything. "Why didn't you just introduce yourself when you came in?" Jenna blurted out, the frustration in her voice evident. "Why play this game? We could have treated you with respect from the start." The old man gave a quiet, almost sad smile. "Respect is earned, not given. You all had the chance to show me respect the moment I walked in. But it wasn't about me, was it? It was about how you saw me." Jenna winced, guilt sinking in. She had laughed at him. Sarah had joked about him being just another homeless man, with nothing better to do than wander into the bank. But now the reality was painfully clear. They had all misjudged him. James, who was still trying to comprehend the full weight of the situation, looked up at the old man with a new sense of wariness. "What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything from you," the old man replied, his tone calm and steady. "I want you to do your jobs, but I also want you to understand that things are changing now. I will be running this bank differently than the Mitchells did, and I expect you to follow my lead." There was something in his voice, an underlying authority that made James's skin prickle. The man wasn't just talking about running a business. He was talking about reshaping their entire world. "So what now?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice shaky, her eyes still wide with disbelief. "What happens to us?" The old man's gaze softened for a moment. "You keep your jobs. The only thing that will change is the way we do things around here." He turned his attention to James. "You're the branch manager. You'll report directly to me. Any changes in policies or operations, I'll inform you. You don't need to worry about your position." James swallowed hard. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here, something that had nothing to do with banking and everything to do with the choices they had made. He had been running his branch by the book for years, following all the Mitchell's rules and traditions. Now everything was uncertain. Jenna couldn't stop herself from asking, "What kind of changes are you talking about?" The old man paused, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly as he looked around the room, as if he were weighing how much to reveal. "I will focus on the community, not just profits. You'll see a shift, more outreach, more connection with the people who use this bank. And the way we treat people." He glanced down at the sack, the corners of his mouth lifting again in that same knowing smile. "That will be a bit different too." Jenna's heart raced. There was something unsettling about his words. He wasn't just talking about business, changes. He was talking about a fundamental shift in how people were treated, how they were valued. It felt like a lesson, but a lesson in something far bigger than banking. "Are we in trouble?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man chuckled softly, the sound strangely reassuring. "No, not if you're willing to. Adapt. But if you're not, well, that's something we'll have to discuss later." There it was again, his calm, measured tone mixed with a hint of something else. Was it a threat? Or was it just his way of preparing them for a world that was about to change? James stood in silence, his thoughts whirling. The man in front of him wasn't just any customer. He wasn't even just a businessman. He was a force, one that could turn their lives upside down in the blink of an eye. The old man turned slowly and started to shuffle toward the door, leaving the sack on the counter, its contents still hidden from view. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back at them all. "I'll be seeing you soon," he said quietly, and with that he stepped out, leaving behind a room full of stunned employees, wondering what had just happened and what was about to happen next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The events of the morning hung in the air like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. The staff at Jefferson Savings Bank, still reeling from the shocking revelation of their new owner, went about their work in a daze. Phones rang unanswered, paperwork piled up on desks, and the normal hum of activity felt more like a distant echo. James stood behind his desk, the manila envelope still open in front of him, the weight of the papers feeling heavier with every passing second. He tried to focus, tried to push aside the thoughts that were swirling in his head, but it wasn't working. The old man had come in with that sack, and in an instant everything had changed. Jenna paced the floor, her hands wringing together in nervous agitation. Sarah, still trying to shake off the shock, sat at her desk, her eyes glazed, staring at the same spot on the floor where the old man had stood just an hour ago. "What do we do now?" Jenna asked, breaking the silence. "Is he really serious about all this?" James took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. His fingers drummed on the desk as he thought. "He must be. I mean, the paperwork was real. Those keys, they have the bank's initials on them. It's all legitimate. I don't know how, but somehow he's the new owner." "But why the theatrics?" Sarah asked, finally lifting her head, her voice laced with frustration. "Why didn't he just introduce himself? Why make us feel like fools?" James rubbed his temples, trying to suppress the headache forming. "I don't know, but we have to take him seriously. He owns the bank now, and that means we have to follow his lead." Jenna stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "Do you think he's going to change everything? I mean, the way we operate, the people we work with, everything?" "Probably," James said quietly, still processing it all. "But we don't know for sure. He could be a hands-off owner, or he could be planning something bigger. Either way, we have to be ready." Just as James spoke, the door to the office swung open with a soft chime, and a tall, middle-aged man in a suit walked in. He looked out, of place in the otherwise subdued atmosphere of the bank, his confident stride cutting through the tension that had settled in the room. "James, I just got off the phone with corporate. We're—" The man stopped mid-sentence as he noticed the look of confusion on James's face. "What's going on here? Why does it look like someone's funeral just passed through?" James turned to face the man, recognizing him instantly. "Derek? What are you doing here?" Derek, one of the senior executives from the main office, raised an eyebrow at James's reaction. "I was sent to check in on things. Corporate wants to make sure the transition goes smoothly. You know, new owner, new direction. You didn't get the memo." James's stomach tightened. The last thing he wanted was to deal with corporate right now, not after the shock of meeting the new owner. But there was no way to avoid it. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I got it. Just had a bit of an unexpected visitor this morning." Derek's eyes scanned the room, picking up on the tension in the air. "What kind of visitor?" "The new owner," James replied, his voice tight. "He showed up today." Derek blinked, clearly surprised. "The new owner? What new owner? You're telling me we got a new owner and no one told me about it?" Jenna's head snapped up. "You didn't know?" Derek threw his hands up. "No, I didn't know. I was just briefed." On the Mitchells stepping down, but there was no mention of someone else taking over this branch, especially not an old man with a sack. James stepped forward, holding up the manila envelope, still stunned by the situation. "I thought it was a joke, too. But he came in with papers, the keys, everything. He's the owner. Jefferson Savings is his now." Derek's face paled. "This is bad. This is really bad." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly unsettled by the news. Corporate doesn't know about this. If this guy's for real, it's going to raise a lot of questions. Who the hell is he? James shook his head, his mind still spinning. I don't know, he didn't tell us much, but he made it clear he's in charge now. Derek looked around the room, his gaze shifting from the stunned employees to the stack of papers on James's desk. He leaned over and flipped through them quickly, his face becoming more grim with each passing page. This is all legitimate. He really did buy the bank. But I have no idea who this guy is. We need answers, Jenna said, her voice sharp. We can't just sit around and wait for him to come back. What if he's here to shut us down? Derek's eyes hardened. We need to figure out who this man is, what he wants, and what he's planning to do with this bank. If we don't get ahead of this, it could be a disaster. James stood up, pacing. But how do we even get to him? He's not just some stranger off the street. He's the new owner of this entire branch, and he made it clear that he's going to do things his way. That's exactly why we need to find out everything we can about him, Derek replied, his voice low. He's going to shake up everything we know. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. As Derek turned to leave, he shot one last look at the employees in the room. I'll be in touch with corporate. You all need to get to work, but stay alert. And don't do anything without checking in with me first. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, leaving the staff alone again, the weight of the situation pressing in. Jenna sank into a chair, still shaken. For what now? James glanced at the envelope on his desk, then at the keys that still lay next to it. His mind was racing. Whoever this old man was, he had turned their world upside down in a matter of hours, and they were only just beginning to understand the consequences of what had happened. We find out who he is, James said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling around him. And we figure out what he wants. Then we prepare. Because if there's one thing I know for sure now, it's that this isn't just a normal day, and things are going to get interesting. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days were a blur for the employees at Jefferson Savings Bank. Rumors swirled like a whirlpool, and the once calm and routine atmosphere had turned into a whirlwind of uncertainty. James, Jenna, and Sarah found themselves grappling with the reality that their entire world had shifted, but no one quite knew how to handle it. James couldn't shake the thought of the old man's eyes, those quiet, piercing eyes, when he handed over the keys. There was something unnerving about him, something calm and collected, like a man who had been through so much in his life that nothing could faze him. It was almost as if he'd seen the worst of the world, and it no longer held any power over him. Jenna couldn't stop asking herself the same question over and over. Who was this man? They had tried searching for any information on him online, but each time they typed his name, they were met with nothing but a void. No articles, no public records, not even a trace of an old man who was suddenly in charge of one of the most prestigious banks in town. It was as if he didn't exist at all. But what troubled her even more was the sack. There was something important about it, something she couldn't put her finger on. She had seen it sitting there on the counter, untouched by anyone after the E. Old man left. The sack, humble and simple, had to mean something. Why else would he carry it in? James sat at his desk, staring at the keys in his hand, lost in thought. He couldn't focus on anything. There was too much going on in his head, too many questions with no answers. The bank had always been his world, and now it was as if someone had come in and ripped the floor from under him. Nothing was stable anymore. Jenna walked into his office, breaking his train of thought. "James, we need to talk," she said, her tone serious. "I've been digging into the records of this man, and I think I found something." James looked up, curious. "What did you find?" Jenna slid a file across the desk. "It's not much, but I found a property under his name, a big piece of land about 20 miles outside of town. It's not listed publicly, though. It's under a shell corporation." She paused, watching him as he skimmed through the pages. "It's weird, right? Why would he be hiding this?" James rubbed his forehead, already feeling the headache return. "This is starting to get even stranger. How does a man like that, someone who looks like he's had a tough life, own something like this?" Jenna nodded, clearly unsettled. "Exactly. And if this lands in his name, then it means he's been playing the long game. It's too calculated. James leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. We need to go there. We need to see this place. If he's hiding something, it's only a matter of time before it catches up with us, and we can't wait for it to be too late. Janet agreed, but as they discussed their next steps, they couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was looming over them. Whoever this old man was, he had control of more than just the bank, and they had to find out what his plans were before it was too late. That evening, James, Jenna, and Sarah piled into James's car, heading for the property that had piqued their curiosity. The drive was quiet, filled with an eerie sense of anticipation. They didn't know what they would find, but they knew it could hold the key to understanding the man who had turned their lives upside down. The road was dark and desolate, the headlights of their car cutting through the night like a blade. Trees lined the sides of the road, casting long, haunting shadows. The further they drove, the more they felt like they were heading into unknown territory. Finally, they reached the property, a sprawling piece of land that seemed to stretch on forever. The moonlight reflected off a large, weathered mansion in the distance, its windows dark and empty, its silhouette imposing against the night sky. As they got out of the car, they couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. The mansion loomed over them, silent and still, like it had been waiting for them to arrive. James led the group forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct in him screamed to turn back, but they had come too far to stop now. They had to know the truth. The closer they got to the mansion, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on them. This wasn't just a property, this was a statement. And whatever was inside that house, whatever secrets the old man was hiding, it was about to change everything. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with dust and the floors creaked underfoot as they explored. They found rooms filled with old furniture, antiques, and paintings of landscapes and cityscapes. But there was no sign of the old man, no trace of his presence anywhere. Then, in the back of the mansion, they stumbled upon a locked door. The key to it, strangely enough, was right there on the desk, as if it had been waiting for them to find it. James hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. As it creaked open, they were met with a dimly lit room. In the center of the room stood a large wooden chest, its surface scarred and weathered by time. Without saying a word, James walked toward the chest, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. What he saw inside left him speechless. The chest was filled with stacks of old worn-out papers, photographs, and old ledgers. But in the back of the chest, buried beneath everything else, was a small leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting inside was meticulous and precise. Jenna stepped forward. "What is this?" James opened the journal carefully. As he read the first few pages, his expression darkened. This is his story. Sarah leaned in to get a closer look. "Who is he?" James's voice was low, almost as if he was afraid to speak the words aloud. "The man we've been calling the old man. He's not just anyone. This is a man who's been planning this for years." As James flipped through the journal, the weight of what he was reading became heavier with each page. The old man, whose name was revealed to be Arthur Collins, was far more than they had ever anticipated. His life wasn't just a series of random events or a chance encounter with a bank. It was methodical. He had been building something over decades, something bigger than just the ownership of Jefferson Savings. The journal's pages were filled with intricate details about Arthur's life. Born into poverty, he had worked his way up from nothing, building connections and acquiring knowledge that most people couldn't even begin to fathom. But what stood out more than anything was the pattern. The journal wasn't just a personal reflection. It was a blueprint, a plan that had been years in the making, and it seemed to include the very bank they worked for. Jenna leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" It's like he knew all of this would happen, like he orchestrated it. James nodded slowly, his fingers trembling as he turned the pages. "He did. He's been planning this. All these years." He worked at various levels of the banking world, building his reputation in silence, and then he made his move. Sarah, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "But why? Why all the secrecy?" Why not just buy the bank and take over? James glanced up, his face pale. Because it's never been about the bank, it's about something much bigger than that. The last few pages of the journal contained references to a secretive network of financial institutions, powerful players, and a series of carefully cultivated relationships. It became clear that Arthur's real objective wasn't just to own a bank. He had been positioning himself to control something far more influential. He wasn't just any businessman, he was part of a larger scheme that stretched across the financial world. "This isn't just about money," Jenna murmured, her eyes wide. "He's playing a game we don't even understand." James stood up, running a hand through his hair. "This is way beyond us. We're just pawns in a much bigger game, and now we're in the middle of it." As they continued to read the journal, they came across a section that seemed especially crucial. It outlined Arthur's plans for the future, plans that involved restructuring Jefferson Savings Bank in a way that would send ripples through the entire financial system. There were mentions of mergers, partnerships, and investments in technologies that had yet to be invented. It was clear that Arthur saw the bank as a starting point, a foundation from which he could launch a far-reaching empire. "I can't believe this," Sarah said, her voice filled with disbelief. "He's not just a businessman, he's a mastermind, and he's been preparing for this for years." James closed the journal, his mind racing. "We have to confront him. We can't just sit back and watch. We have to know what he plans to do next, and we have to decide if we're going to be a part of it." Jenna, still processing everything, nodded slowly. "But how do we approach him? He's not exactly someone you can just walk up to and ask questions." James looked down at the journal, then at the mansion around them. "We need to meet him, on his terms. He's been in control of this situation from the beginning, and if we want answers, we have to go to him. We have to understand what he's really after." They all stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of their decision hanging in the air. Whatever path they chose from here, there would be no turning back. The man who had walked into their bank with a sack wasn't just an old man. He was a figure in a game they hadn't even known existed. And now they were players in it. The following morning, James, Jenna, and Sarah arrived at the bank early, determined to face whatever was coming next. They had spent the night debating their options, but there was one thing they all agreed on. They needed to get to the bottom of Arthur Collins's plans. The bank was quieter than usual, the atmosphere thick with unease. The staff moved around mechanically, as if they were all in a trance, still reeling from the shock of Arthur's appearance. James walked into his office and sat down behind his desk, trying to push the nervous energy out of his system. He didn't have much time to dwell on his thoughts before a knock came at the door. It was Jenna, looking more determined than ever. "Have you heard anything?" James asked, his voice low. "No," Jenna replied, shaking her head. "But I've been thinking about something. Arthur didn't just buy the bank. He bought everything, the building, the assets, the property, everything. That means he's planning something long-term, not just a quick flip or an investment." James frowned. "Exactly. And that's what scares me. It's like he's been laying the groundwork for years, and now it's all coming together. The real question is, why us? Why this bank?" Jenna looked around the office, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. Maybe he didn't just buy a bank. Maybe he bought trust, reputation, and a network of people who are already established in the community. He's building something much bigger. Before James could respond, the door opened again, this time revealing Arthur Collins himself. He stood in the doorway, dressed in his usual modest clothes, a quiet confidence emanating from him. The same man who had once seemed like a harmless figure now seemed to loom larger than life. There was an aura of control around him that made James's stomach churn. Arthur stepped into the room, his eyes locking onto James. "I'm glad to see you're still here," he said softly, his voice calm but firm. "I need you to listen closely, James. We're about to embark on something much bigger than you've ever imagined, and you have a choice to make." James stood up, trying to maintain his composure. "What's going on, Arthur? What is all of this? Why did you come?" "Here?" Arthur smiled, but there was something almost menacing in his expression. "You'll see soon enough, but before you make any decisions, let me tell you this. I'm not asking for your loyalty, James. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking You to understand that I'm the one who controls the future, and I'm giving you the chance to be a part of it." James felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know if he was ready to join whatever Arthur had in mind, but one thing was clear. Arthur Collins wasn't just a man with a plan. He was a force of nature, and they were all caught in his storm. The air in the office seemed to freeze as Arthur stood there, his piercing gaze locked onto James, Jenna, and Sarah. The weight of his words hung heavily in the room, pressing down on their chests like a thick fog. There was no denying it anymore. Arthur Collins wasn't just a mysterious old man. He was a force, a man with plans that reached beyond anything they could have imagined. And now they had to decide whether they were going to follow him or turn away. Arthur slowly stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't seem to care that he was intruding on their space, that he was the source of their growing panic. His confidence was disarming, like a predator who knew exactly how to play the game. James opened his mouth, but the words didn't come immediately. Instead, he just stared at Arthur, trying to piece together everything that had happened. He thought about the journal, about the mansion, about the sack, the clues that had started to form a picture of a man who had spent years plotting, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Arthur spoke first, breaking the silence. "I know you're all wondering why you're here, why you're involved. I understand the confusion, but I'm going to make it very simple for you." His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of authority that left no room for doubt. "I didn't just buy this bank. I didn't just walk in one day with a sack and make a power move. What you need to understand is that everything has led to this moment." Jenna's voice cut through the tension. "What do you want from us, Arthur? What's the point of all this?" Arthur's lips curled into a faint smile. "What I want, Jenna, is for you to be a part of something that will reshape the financial world. The future of banking is already here, and you three are in the position to help me guide it forward. It's bigger than any of you could imagine." Sarah, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "We don't even know who you really are. All we've seen is an old man with a sack walking into a bank. What makes you think we'd just follow you?" Arthur didn't flinch at Sarah's challenge. He simply walked over to the window, staring out at the skyline for a moment before turning back to them. "It's not about following me," he said. "It's about seeing the bigger picture. This isn't just a small-town bank anymore. It's a key to a much larger game, a game that can change everything for everyone." James's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of Arthur's words sank in. He had seen it firsthand. The old man wasn't just talking about financial power. He was talking about reshaping society. And if they said yes, they'd be stepping into a world where the rules were different, where morality and ethics became gray areas. Arthur continued, his eyes now piercing James. "I know what you're thinking. You're scared. You're wondering what will happen if you say no. But let me tell you this. There is no no in this game. It's already happening whether you're in or not. I can promise you that your futures will be far better if you decide to work with me." Jenna crossed her arms, clearly not convinced. "And what happens if we don't? What happens if we walk away from all of this?" Arthur's smile faded, replaced by a serious look that made the air feel even colder. "If you walk away, then you walk away from everything. The choices you make now will decide the rest of your lives. You'll go back to your mundane, predictable jobs and nothing will change. But if you choose to join me, you'll have access to opportunities that most people could never dream of." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What do you want from us, Arthur? Do you want our loyalty, our trust, or are you just trying to control everything?" Arthur's gaze softened for a moment, as if he were trying to gauge their reactions. "It's not about loyalty, Sarah. It's about vision, about seeing what others cannot. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something that will change everything, not just for you, but for the world." James exchanged a look with Jenna and Sarah, his mind racing. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, and Arthur had more of it than any of them had realized. He had been preparing for this moment for decades, and now it was their turn to decide whether to join him or walk away. After a long pause, James stood up, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We need time to think. This is a lot to take in." Arthur nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Of course, but remember, the longer you wait, the less control you have over the outcome. Think carefully, James. Your next decision could define everything. With that, Arthur turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before he left. He looked over his shoulder and said, "I'll be here when you're ready, and I won't wait forever." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving James, Jenna, and Sarah in stunned silence. As the door closed, the three of them stood there, lost in thought. The gravity of what Arthur had said was undeniable. What he was offering wasn't just a job. It was a chance to be part of a revolution in the financial world, one that would change everything they knew about money, power, and influence. Jenna finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" James shook his head. "I don't know. This is bigger than anything I've ever dealt with. I thought I understood banking, but this is something else." Sarah, always the practical one, was the first to speak with a sense of clarity. "We can't just follow him blindly. We need to know more about him. We need to dig deeper into his past, into who he really is." James nodded slowly. "I agree, we need answers. But we can't keep doing this on our own. We'll need help. We have to be smart about this. If we're going to play in this game, we need to know the rules." The three of them stood there contemplating their next move. The stakes had never been higher. Arthur Collins had laid out his offer, but whether they took it or walked away would shape their futures, and possibly the future of the entire financial world. The days after their conversation with Arthur were filled with tension and uncertainty. James, Jenna, and Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the cryptic offer Arthur had made. The weight of the decision hung over them, casting a shadow over every conversation and every thought. None of them had expected to be pulled into a world of power and manipulation, yet here they were, teetering on the edge of a precipice with no clear way forward. James found himself pacing the office late one evening, staring out the window at the city lights. The glow from the streets below seemed so peaceful, so distant, yet everything had changed. Arthur had shown them the allure of power, of a future that could be theirs if they chose to join him, but the more James thought about it, the more he felt uneasy. "Can we trust him?" he muttered to himself. Jenna had been spending the last few days going over every detail they could find about Arthur Collins, his past, his investments, his business dealings. She had already spoken to a few contacts, but most of what she uncovered only deepened the mystery. Arthur Collins was a man with no official history, a ghost in the financial world. He'd built his empire quietly, almost unnoticed until now. But what was his true game, and why did he choose them? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, breaking James from his thoughts. It was Sarah, looking more serious than usual. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice heavy with something James couldn't quite place. "I've found something." James's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the desk. "I've been digging into Arthur's past and I found something disturbing." Jenna walked in just as Sarah opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents inside. James felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he leaned forward. "Arthur's not just a businessman," Sarah continued, her tone grim. "He's a player in something much darker. I found records, court cases, financial transactions, people. He's been involved with some shady stuff. We're not talking about a simple takeover of a bank. He's been behind a network of illegal dealings, and I don't think it's just financial." James's hand trembled as he flipped through. The papers, the names, the dates, the connections, it was all there, painted in black and white. Arthur Collins had been involved in underground financial dealings, using his network to manipulate stock markets, launder money, and build a hidden empire. But what unsettled James the most was the recurring name that appeared throughout the documents. The network. "What is the network?" Jenna asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah shook her head. "That's what I can't figure out. There's nothing official about it. It's like a shadow organization, a group of powerful individuals from different industries, all pulling the strings behind the scenes. Arthur's the key player, but it's bigger than him." James's mind raced. If what Sarah was saying was true, then Arthur wasn't just a businessman with a vision. He was part of something much more dangerous, This wasn't just about the bank, this was about control. And Arthur Collins was positioning himself to hold the reins of a financial empire that could change the world. "We need to confront him," Jenna said, her voice firm. "We need to ask him about this network. If he's involved in something illegal, we can't just let it slide." James hesitated. "But what if he's more powerful than we realize? What if we're just pawns in a game we don't understand?" Sarah leaned in, her face serious. "Then we have to understand it. We have to find out everything about this network and what Arthur's true intentions are. We can't just stand by and wait for it to consume us." James stood up, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, we have no choice. We have to get answers. But we need to be careful. We can't let him know we're onto him." Jenna and Sarah exchanged a look and they both nodded in agreement. There was no turning back now. They had crossed a line and they knew it. The only way to get out of this mess was to take control of the situation, and that meant going after the truth. The next day, James called Arthur to arrange a meeting. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. They had to confront him head-on, but they needed to be prepared. This time it wasn't just about the bank, it was about everything he had hidden, and they couldn't allow themselves to be blindsided again. When Arthur agreed to meet, he instructed them to come to the mansion that had become so familiar. It was time for the final confrontation, the moment of reckoning. As James, Jenna, and Sarah walked through the grand doors of the mansion, the weight of what they were about to do pressed on them. They knew that this conversation would change everything. Arthur was waiting for them in the same room where they had met before, seated comfortably in an armchair. He greeted them with a smile that was too calm, too knowing. "I see you've come for answers," Arthur said, his voice like velvet. "I've been expecting you." James took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "We need to talk, Arthur, about the network." Arthur's smile faltered just for a second before it returned. "Ah, so you've been doing your homework. You've been hiding something," Jenna said, her voice steady. "We found out about your connections, your dealings, and we want the truth. What is this network, and why have you dragged us into it?" Arthur didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes glinting with something darker. "You think you've uncovered the whole story, but you've only scratched the surface. The network isn't just about power. It's about survival. It's about controlling the flow of money, information, and influence. And I'm offering you a chance to be part of that control." Sarah stepped forward, her fists clenched. "What kind of control? What do you want from us?" Arthur looked at them, his gaze steady. "I don't want anything from you. Not yet. What I'm offering is power, influence, and the chance to be part of something bigger than any of you could have imagined. But if you don't want to join me, that's fine. Just know that the network doesn't care about your hesitation. The wheels are already in motion." James felt his stomach churn. The words Arthur was speaking weren't just a promise, they were a threat. The silence in the room grew oppressive as Arthur's words echoed in James's mind. The offer he made was chilling. Not just in its magnitude, but in the sheer audacity of it. The network, power, control. It was all too much, too fast. And yet, there was a sense of inevitability hanging over them, like they were already too far in to back out now. James, Jenna, and Sarah stood there, frozen in place, processing the revelation that Arthur wasn't just a businessman with grand ambitions. He was the leader of something far darker, more insidious, something they hadn't even begun to fully comprehend. Arthur's calm voice broke through their thoughts. "You see, I've built something that transcends the financial world. This isn't just about making money, it's about shaping the future. The network holds all the pieces, and I have the key." Jenna couldn't hide the skepticism in her voice. "You expect us to believe that? You want us to just join your network without any more explanation? After everything we've learned?" Arthur's smile didn't waver. "I don't expect anything. I'm offering you the chance to be a part of something unprecedented. The choice is yours." James's pulse quickened as the weight of what Arthur was saying sank in. A chance to be part of a network that controlled the flow of money, information, and influence. It sounded like a power so immense it could reshape entire economies, entire governments. And yet, there was a dark undercurrent to it, a danger they hadn't yet fully grasped. "We can't just ignore what we've uncovered," Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency. "This isn't a game, Arthur. We're talking about criminal activity, money laundering, underground dealings. If this network is what you say it is, then we're looking at something that could destroy lives. Arthur's eyes darkened slightly, but his smile remained intact. What I'm offering is control. It's about steering the world in the direction you want it to go. You think the system is broken? It's not. It's just been designed for a select few to control. And now, it's time for those of us with the right vision to take over. Jenna's hands were shaking now, her mind racing. This is insane. You want us to be complicit in your plan to help you build this empire? But at what cost? At what cost to everyone else? Arthur's gaze softened, but there was no compassion in it. The cost is nothing compared to the rewards. You think the world is fair? It's not. The only thing that matters is power. Those who have it and those who don't. You have the opportunity to be on the winning side. The words hit hard. James could feel his chest tighten as a storm of conflicting thoughts raged inside him. On one hand, the offer was tempting, the chance to be part of something greater, to have power and influence at their fingertips. It was everything they had ever dreamed of. But on the other hand, the implications of such a choice were terrifying. Could they really live with themselves if they joined Arthur in his dark mission? What kind of world would they be helping to create? Arthur, you can't seriously expect us to buy into this, James said, his voice cracking with the weight of his doubt. There's no way we can be part of something like this. It's wrong. Arthur stood up slowly, his presence filling the room like a force of nature. He walked toward James, his eyes locked on his with an intensity that made the air feel thick. You think you have a choice? Arthur asked, his voice low and steady. You don't. Not anymore. The network is already here. It's already in motion. You can either be a part of it or you can step aside. But make no mistake, you're already part of the system. Whether you choose to accept it or not, the world doesn't wait for you to catch up. Jenna stepped forward, her voice a mixture of fear and defiance. What if we choose to walk away? What if we refuse? Arthur's smile was cold, devoid of any warmth. Then you will have made an enemy of the most powerful force in the world. And believe me, you don't want to make an enemy of me. The tension in the room was unbearable. The three of them stood there, each grappling with the reality of their situation. Could they walk away from this? Could they continue living their lives as if nothing had changed? Or was Arthur right? Were they already part of something bigger, something they couldn't escape? Suddenly there was a soft knock at the door, and before anyone could respond, it opened. A figure stepped into the room, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. Arthur's expression changed for a moment, a flicker of something passing over his face before he turned back to the group. Excuse me for a moment, Arthur said, his tone suddenly colder. This is a matter of business. The man in the suit approached Arthur and handed him the briefcase. Without a word, Arthur opened it, revealing a stack of papers, contracts, and a flash drive. He held it up for James, Jenna, and Sarah to see. I'm not asking for your decision yet, Arthur said as he slowly placed the documents on the table in front of them. But when you're ready to make it, the choice will be clear. These documents will outline what's at stake. Take a look, then you'll understand. Jenna leaned forward, glancing at the papers. There were names, powerful names, names that sent shivers down her spine. But it was the flash drive that caught her attention. It was labeled simply, The Network's Blueprint. Arthur's voice broke through her thoughts. Look closely and you'll see the whole plan, the connections, the influence, the power, everything. Once you see it, you won't be able to turn away. James's stomach churned. He knew this was their breaking point, the choice between stepping into the shadows with Arthur and living with the consequences, or walking away and risking everything. As they stared at the documents, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. The weight of the flash drive in front of them was suffocating. James, Jenna, and Sarah sat there, staring at the sleek device as if it were a ticking bomb. Arthur's calm demeanor only heightened their sense of urgency, as though he knew exactly what they were thinking, what they were feeling. But they had no time to waste. Every passing second made the decision feel more impossible. Jenna was the first to speak. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she reached for the flash drive. "We need to see what's on this. We can't make a decision without knowing what we're really dealing with." Arthur nodded approvingly, his smile never fading. "Exactly. Once you see the full picture, it will all make sense, but remember, there's no turning back once you know." With a deep breath, Jenna plugged the flash drive into the laptop sitting on the desk. The screen flickered to life, and a folder appeared on the screen titled "The Network's Blueprint." A few clicks, and a series of encrypted files opened up before their eyes. Each document was more shocking than the last. James leaned forward, reading over Jenna's shoulder. The first document was a high-level map of connections, business partners, government officials, and international elites. It was a web of influence so intricate, so widespread, that it was nearly impossible to comprehend. The names jumped off the screen: bankers, politicians, CEOs, all connected by a common thread: Arthur Collins. Sarah, who had been sitting silently, suddenly spoke up, her voice sharp with disbelief. This is a global network. These aren't just shady financial deals, Arthur. This is political manipulation, corporate sabotage. It's all here." Arthur didn't react. He simply stood there, watching them closely as they absorbed the contents of the files. The documents detailed how the network had been quietly pulling the strings in everything from stock market crashes to international policy shifts. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about controlling entire economies, dictating global movements. Jenna clicked through a few more files. Some contained handwritten notes and strategies for dealing with opposition. Others outlined blackmail attempts, covert operations, and a chilling list of people who had been removed for not complying with the network's wishes. "I've had to make some tough decisions along the way," Arthur said, his voice suddenly laced with a hint of emotion. "But everything I've done has been for the greater good. The network is a necessary force in this world. Without it, everything would fall apart. People need to be controlled, or chaos will ensue." James recoiled at the thought. "This isn't about control, it's about power. Absolute power, and you're willing to destroy anyone who gets in your way." Arthur's eyes darkened, and for the first time there was a flash of anger in his gaze. "You don't understand. The world is already in chaos. The system is broken. If you want to change things, you need to accept that power is the only way to fix it. And you three, you're on the verge of becoming the ones who can make that change. All you have to do is take the step." The room seemed to close in on James. He felt his chest tighten as the weight of the decision pressed down on him. He could hear his heartbeat thundering in his ears, drowning out Arthur's voice. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. They were no longer just business people. They were potential pawns in a game far larger than they had ever imagined. "Arthur," Jenna said quietly, her voice trembling, "this isn't the world we want to be a part of. You want to control everything. You want to pull the strings, manipulate people. This isn't about making the world better. It's about your ego." Arthur's expression hardened. "You don't get it, do you? You're talking about ideals. Ideals don't work in this world. I've spent my life building something that actually works, something that gives me control, and now I'm offering you the same opportunity. You can have it all. You can be part of something that changes everything, or you can walk away and live your meaningless little lives. The choice is yours." The tension in the room reached its peak. James felt nauseous, the world spinning around him as he tried to process everything. How could they walk away from this? How could they ignore the opportunity to have power like that? But at what cost? His gaze moved to Jenna and Sarah. They were both silent, lost in thought, torn between the weight of what they could gain and the cost they would have to pay to be part of it. There was a moment of shared understanding between them. They knew what this choice meant, not just for their future, but for their souls. "I can't do this," James finally said, his voice breaking through the suffocating silence. "We can't. This isn't us. This isn't who we want to be." Arthur's expression faltered for the briefest moment, before his cold smile returned. "So this is how it ends. You'll walk away from all of this. Fine. But remember, there's no going back. If you think you can just leave and go back to your old lives, you're wrong. The network doesn't forget, and neither do I." James stood up, feeling his legs shake beneath him. "Then we'll deal with that when the time comes. But we're not joining you." Jenna closed her laptop with a snap. "We're done, Arthur. This ends here." Sarah nodded, her voice firm. "We're not your pawns. Not now, not ever." Arthur didn't move for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he nodded. "Very well, but don't think this is over. This was your choice. And now you'll have to live with the consequences." James felt the weight of Arthur's words, but they didn't sway him. He had made his decision. They had all made their decision. As they walked out of the mansion, leaving behind the cold, calculating world Arthur had built, there was a sense of relief in the air. But it was tempered with a deep, gnawing uncertainty. They had chosen to walk away from power, but what they didn't realize yet was that stepping away from the network might be even more dangerous than joining it. The moment they stepped out of Arthur's mansion, the chill in the air hit them like a cold slap. The weight of their decision lingered between them, a silent understanding that things would never be the same again. They had chosen to turn their backs on a chance at unimaginable power. But as they walked down the long driveway toward their cars, James couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they hadn't just walked away from Arthur. They had walked into something far more dangerous, the world felt different now, lighter in some ways but heavier in others. The path they had chosen was uncertain, and the price of defiance wasn't something they could easily calculate. As they reached their cars, Jenna broke the silence. "We did the right thing, didn't we?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I mean, we couldn't join him, not after everything we saw." James nodded slowly, though a part of him still felt uncertain. "Yeah, we couldn't. But it feels like we've just stepped off the edge of a cliff, and we don't know what's at the bottom." Sarah, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "We made our choice. It's not going to be easy, but I'm not going to let Arthur get away with what he's doing. I refuse to be a part of that." But even as Sarah said the words, James could feel the unease crawling up his spine. Arthur had made it clear. Leaving the network didn't mean they were free. They had just made themselves targets, and worse. Yet they had drawn a line in the sand with a man who was capable of anything. "Do you think he'll come after us?" Jenna asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "He won't just come after us," James replied grimly. "The network won't forget us. We know too much now. We've seen the blueprint. And Arthur isn't someone who lets people walk away without consequences." There was a moment of silence, the weight of their situation settling on their shoulders like an invisible burden. None of them spoke for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. They had all known on some level that turning down Arthur's offer would mean something more than just walking away. It was a declaration of war. Jenna broke the silence again, her voice softer this time. "What do we do now? How do we fight something like this?" James didn't have an answer. He had no idea. All he knew was that they couldn't just sit back and wait for the network to come for them. They had to take action. They had to expose it, bring it down. But how? Arthur had made it clear that the network was vast, powerful, and deeply entrenched. It wasn't just going to be a matter of blowing the whistle. "We need allies," Sarah said, her voice filled with resolve. "There have to be people out there who are against what he's doing, people who want to fight back." James nodded. "But who? Who do we trust? Arthur controls so much already. Who's left that can help us?" Jenna's eyes darkened as she looked at them. "I think I know someone who might be able to help." James raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Jenna hesitated, clearly unsure about what she was about to say. "My old boss. He works for a government agency, but he's been talking about the network for a while. I don't know how much he knows, but I do know he's trying to gather evidence. If anyone can help us, it's him." James felt a flicker of hope. "We need to talk to him then. Let's figure out how to bring this down, together." The drive to Jenna's old boss's office was long, and the tension in the car felt thick, almost suffocating. As they approached the building, James couldn't help but notice how quiet everything seemed. No more chaos, no more power plays. Just the muted hum of the city, a far cry from the world Arthur Collins had shown them. They parked outside a nondescript office building, and Jenna led the way inside. Her old boss, Michael Thompson, was a grizzled, middle-aged man who had seen it all. When they entered his office, the look on his face was one of cautious optimism, tempered by the weight of the situation. He had been waiting for them. "Jenna, I didn't think I'd see you here," Michael said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "I assume you've seen the files. You know what we're dealing with." Jenna nodded, glancing at James and Sarah, before looking back at Michael. "We know, but we need your help. Arthur Collins is more dangerous than we realized. We need to take him down, but we can't do it alone. You have connections. You know how to fight this." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying them for a moment. "Arthur Collins isn't just some businessman. He's a mastermind, and this network, it's deeper than you think. The government has tried to track him for years. I've been gathering intel, but it's hard to make a move without concrete proof." Sarah stepped forward. "We have that proof. We've seen the blueprint. The network's entire operation, how it's structured, who's involved, it's all in there." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You have it? That's huge." He stood up quickly, moving to a filing cabinet and pulling out a folder. "I've been working on something similar, but this is the kind of evidence we need. We can expose this. We can bring it all crashing down." Jenna, James, and Sarah exchanged a look. This was the turning point. With Michael's help, they might just have the chance to go after Arthur, to expose the network for what it truly was. "We're in," James said, determination burning in his chest. "Let's do this." The next few days were a blur of late nights and secret meetings. Jenna, James, and Sarah, alongside Michael Thompson, worked tirelessly to piece together everything they knew about the network. They carefully analyzed the files Arthur had left behind, deciphering encrypted data, cross-referencing names, and mapping out connections that ran deeper than any of them had expected. The reality of what they were up against was beginning to sink in. The network was more than just a collection of shady deals or a group of power-hungry elites. It was an intricate web of influence, spanning across countries, industries, and governments. It wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a shadow government that had been operating right under the noses of the public for decades. And Arthur Collins was at its very center, the mastermind pulling the strings. James rubbed his eyes as he stared at the computer screen, trying to make sense of the countless names and dates scrolling before him. "This is insane. It's like they've infiltrated everything: banking, politics, media, even education." Michael nodded, tapping the screen with his finger. "This is what they've been doing for years, slowly building a power structure that's so embedded, so pervasive, that no one even notices. And anyone who tries to speak out is either silenced or bought off. We need something big to bring it all down." Sarah glanced over at Michael. "You said the government has been trying to take them down. Why hasn't anyone succeeded?" Michael sighed, a look of frustration crossing his face. "Because the people in power don't want it to end. Those in high positions, the ones pulling the strings, they're all in on it. And anyone who's tried to challenge Arthur has either been silenced or discredited. It's a system that works because it's been allowed to continue unchecked." Jenna sat back in her chair, running a hand through her hair. "So we're fighting not just Arthur, but the entire system. This isn't going to be easy." "It's not supposed to be easy," Michael replied, "but it can be done. We have the evidence now. What we need is leverage, something that will shake the network to its core, something that Arthur can't ignore." James stood up, pacing the room. "We need to hit him where it hurts. We need to expose something so big that even his most loyal followers won't be able to ignore it." Michael's eyes lit up as if a thought had just crossed his mind. "I think I know how we can do that." The plan was simple in theory, but the stakes were incredibly high. Michael had connections in the media, a few trustworthy journalists who could help spread the word. They would leak the files they had gathered slowly and strategically, making sure the right people saw them at the right time. The goal was to get enough public attention and pressure on the network, enough to force their hand and create cracks in the facade. But there were risks. Arthur Collins wasn't a man who took threats lightly. If they moved too soon, or if the wrong person got hold of the information, it could all backfire. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. The team spent the next few days preparing, crafting their story, getting in touch with the journalists, and making sure their digital footprint was covered. They also knew they had to act fast. The longer they waited, the greater the chances that Arthur's people would come after them. On the third night of their planning, as they sat in Michael's office reviewing the final details. There was a sudden knock at the door. Jenna stiffened. "Who is that?" Michael stood up cautiously. "Stay back. I'll check." He approached the door, glancing through the peephole. When he turned back to them, his face had drained of color. "It's him," Michael said quietly. "Arthur's people. They know." The group froze, a wave of panic sweeping over them. James felt his heart race. It was happening sooner than they had anticipated. They were out of time. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "We fight," Michael said, his voice hardening. "But we need to move now. He's not here to talk. He's here to end this." With no time to waste, they quickly gathered everything they could. The files, their laptops, the physical documents that tied Arthur and the network together. They had to get out of the building and disappear before Arthur's people could catch up with them. Michael led them through the back exit, taking care to avoid security cameras. They moved swiftly, knowing that every second counted. But as they reached the alley behind the building, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. "They're closing in," Jenna said, her voice tight with fear. James turned to look at Michael. "Which way?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Follow me." They ducked down an alley and into a side street, weaving between buildings to make sure they weren't being followed. It felt like they were in a race against time, a desperate attempt to outrun the forces that were after them. As they rounded a corner, Michael's phone buzzed. He pulled it out quickly, glancing at the screen. "It's done," Michael said. "The story's out. The journalists are running with it." James felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. "It's too late for them to stop it now." "Not necessarily," Michael replied, "but it's the best shot we've got." The group moved quickly, ducking into a safe house that Michael had arranged for them. It was a small, nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for lying low until the storm blew over. But as they stepped inside, the reality of their situation hit hard. They had just exposed the network, and now there was no going back. The days that followed their daring escape were a whirlwind of tension, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of hope. Jenna, James, Sarah, and Michael huddled together in the safe house, monitoring every piece of news, every development, and every small flicker of movement that might hint at how the network was reacting to their explosive leak. The media had picked up the story. Bits and pieces of the documents began circulating, and whispers of the network's vast reach spread across news outlets and social media. But the response was far from what they had hoped for. While the public was shocked and horrified by the revelations, the power structure that protected Arthur Collins remained intact. Arthur's influence ran deep, and he had the resources to make problems disappear, no matter how public or dangerous. As the days dragged on, the team started to feel the weight of their decision. The leak had shaken things up, but it hadn't brought the network to its knees. Not yet. They were still hiding, still watching, still waiting for the fallout. And more than anything, they were beginning to realize just how far-reaching the danger had become. The network wasn't just a faceless entity anymore. It was personal. They had been marked as enemies. "Do you think it's over?" Sarah asked. One evening, as they sat around a battered kitchen table, eating dinner that tasted like cardboard. Her face was weary, her eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. "I mean, we did it, right? The world knows what's been going on. Shouldn't that be enough?" Jenna looked up from the laptop where she had been checking the news. "It's never enough. Arthur doesn't work on public opinion. He works with power. He manipulates people, buys them off, silences anyone who gets too close. He'll just keep doing what he's doing, trying to bury this. The real fight starts now." James ran a hand through his hair, frustration clouding his features. "We exposed a part of it, yeah, but there's still so much we don't know. So much that Arthur's been hiding. We don't even have the whole picture yet." Michael, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up, his voice low and serious. "You're right. Arthur's not just going to fold because of a few leaks, but he's feeling the pressure. The fact that we got this far means we've struck a chord, but it's going to take more. We need to hit him harder, make him panic." "How do we do that?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We go bigger," Michael replied, looking each of them in the eyes. "We start exposing more of the network, piece by piece. We need to make them question everything they've built, make them realize that their power is fragile. Arthur won't stop until he crushes us, but we can make it so hard for him to breathe that he'll have no choice but to lash out. And when he does, when he overreaches, we take him down. James felt the weight of Michael's words settle on him. The plan sounded dangerous, but they were beyond the point of no return now. They couldn't go back. There was no going back from exposing the largest, most dangerous conspiracy the world had ever known. The next few days were spent preparing for the next phase of their plan. They reached out to more journalists, began contacting people who might have insider knowledge of the network, and gathered every shred of evidence they could find to keep the pressure on Arthur. Each piece of new information, each contact they made, brought them closer to understanding the full scope of the network and Arthur's role within it. But they weren't just uncovering secrets, they were making enemies. The deeper they dug, the more they realized just how far the network had infiltrated, how many powerful people were involved, and how many lives it had ruined over the years. Michael's contacts proved invaluable, but even he knew they were running out of time. "Arthur won't stop until he destroys us," he said one night, pacing the cramped living room of the safe house. "But if we can make this bigger, if we can make the public demand accountability, he might not be able to keep it all together. The power structures he's woven together might start to unravel." James nodded, his mind racing. "We need more evidence, more allies." "We need a rallying cry," Sarah said suddenly. "Something people can get behind, a reason for them to care, to rise up and demand change." Jenna looked at her, realization dawning. "You're right. We can't just expose the network. We need to make people care about what's at stake. We need a face to this, someone the public can rally behind, someone they can see as the victim of all of this." James leaned forward. "And we can't just tell people what's been done. We need to show them. We need to humanize the consequences of the network's actions." Michael looked at them with a thoughtful expression. "This could work. If we create a narrative, something people can connect with, something personal, they'll listen. They won't be able to ignore it." The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and strategy sessions. They decided to focus their efforts on a high-profile victim, someone whose life had been destroyed by the network, someone who could serve as the face of their movement. After a lot of digging, they found him, a former tech entrepreneur named Ethan Hayes, whose company had been targeted and destroyed by the network years earlier. His story was heartbreaking. He had built a thriving business, only for Arthur and his associates to sabotage it, bankrupt him, and ruin his reputation. Ethan agreed to go public with his story, but only on the condition that he could remain anonymous for a while, until the pressure grew enough to expose the true depth of the corruption. With Ethan's testimony and personal story, they could start to paint a picture for the public, a picture of the real human cost of the network's actions. As the weeks went by, the pressure began to mount. The leaks, the testimonies, and the mounting evidence started to build a public outcry. Arthur couldn't hide forever, and soon he'd have to make a choice: continue to fight back with all the power at his disposal, or expose himself, making him the very thing he had been hiding all along. The final showdown was coming. They should have known it wouldn't be long. By the second week of the public leaks, the tide began to shift. For a while it felt like they were winning. Ethan Hayes' story had gone viral. His emotional interview, voice altered and face blurred, had struck a nerve with millions. People began digging into the network themselves. Hashtags trended. Protests sparked outside buildings affiliated with Arthur's empire. Whistleblowers started sending anonymous tips. There was a sense for the first time that maybe, just maybe, the public would rise up. But Arthur was no fool. He'd spent decades building a fortress, and now it was under siege, and he was ready to strike back. It began subtly. Jenna's old phone number was reactivated, registered under a fake name and traced to illegal activity. James's bank account was flagged for suspicious transactions. Sarah's family received anonymous threats about her whereabouts. Michael's name appeared on a list of rogue agents released by an obscure right-wing blog, a site likely owned by one of Arthur's shell companies. They were being digitally erased. "You're watching the start of a full-on counterattack," Michael said, pacing their dimly lit safe house, jaw clenched. Arthur's not trying to silence us quietly anymore. He's discrediting us publicly. If we lose the public's trust, we lose everything." Jenna looked up from her laptop, panic creeping into her voice. "There's a story trending that says I doctored Ethan's interview, that he was paid. People are starting to believe it. They're planting disinfo faster than we can push the truth," Sarah muttered. "They're not just controlling the narrative, they're rewriting it." James stood by the window, peeking through the blinds. He'd become paranoid lately, jumping at every car that slowed near their building. If this is what they're doing online, what's next? Michael's face darkened. We prepare for the worst and we hit back harder. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay on the worn couch, staring at the cracked ceiling, heart thudding against his ribs like the drum. Arthur Collins had crossed a line. No more shadows, no more games. This was war. He thought about his parents, how proud they had been when he got his MBA, when he launched his first startup, about how much he wanted to make them proud again. But if Arthur won, it wouldn't matter what they'd accomplished. Their future would be nothing but lies and manipulation. A soft knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. He sat up, tense. "It's me," came Jenna's voice. James opened the door. She looked tired, eyes rimmed red, clutching her laptop like it was armor. "I think I found something," she said. They gathered in the living room, the glow from Jenna's screen illuminating their anxious faces. She pulled up a folder of encrypted documents, ones they hadn't dared to open before, assuming they were corrupt. But tonight she'd cracked part of the encryption, and what she'd found made her blood run cold. "It's a contingency plan," Jenna whispered. "Arthur calls it Black Echo. It outlines a response to full public exposure. He's got names of journalists, officials, business rivals, not just blackmail material, hit lists, physical elimination, strategic disinformation, economic sabotage." Sarah's mouth dropped open. "He's not just fighting back, he's preparing to destroy anyone who's ever stood against him." Michael leaned in, scanning the files. "This is the kind of thing that could bring him down for good, if we can verify it. If we can prove he's prepared to assassinate people, then he's not a misunderstood mogul," James finished. "He's a criminal mastermind." But they all knew what came with that. If they leaked this, it would be a declaration. One that couldn't be taken back. "We leak it," Jenna said softly, "and we do it soon." They worked all night, verifying file metadata, matching names and code words to real people, cross-referencing operations. Then encrypting the files again, backing them up in 3 locations across the dark web, and prepping a controlled release through their media contacts. The next day, the news broke. "Leaked files reveal billionaire's secret elimination program," the headline screamed. It went global in hours. Suddenly, Arthur Collins wasn't just controversial. He was dangerous. Politicians began to distance themselves. Companies began to cut ties. Whistleblowers came forward with even more damning evidence. The FBI announced an internal investigation. The stock price of Arthur's largest holding company tanked 15% by noon. They had hit a nerve. But with every win came escalation. That night, as James stepped out for air, a black SUV sped down the street. Its windows were tinted, engine purring low. It didn't stop. Didn't even slow, but James knew they'd been found. Inside, Michael grabbed his pistol and locked the doors. "We've got to move now." Sarah clutched her laptop, heart racing. "To where?" "There's a safe house in Maryland," Michael said. "Off-grid. I used it once during a deep op in 09. If Arthur's unleashing the dogs, we need to vanish." They packed in 15 minutes, leaving behind everything but the essentials. As they drove through the night, headlights cutting through the darkness, no one spoke. The game had changed again. They weren't just rebels, they were fugitives, but they were also closer than ever to tearing down the empire Arthur had built. The Maryland safe house was hidden deep in the woods, far off any paved road, surrounded by nothing but silence, pines, and the smell of damp earth. An old hunting lodge reinforced with steel doors and solar panels. It had clearly seen better days, but for the first time in weeks, they felt invisible. "Welcome to the last line of defense," Michael muttered as he unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. The inside was cold, dusty, and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was safe, And right now, that was everything. Jenna dropped her backpack and collapsed onto the couch. God, I forgot what it feels like to not be constantly checking over my shoulder. James closed the curtains, his eyes scanning the dense forest outside. They won't stop. Even if the story's gone public, Arthur isn't going to just roll over. No, Sarah said from the corner of the room, lighting a portable burner for coffee. But we forced him to show his teeth. That's a win. We're getting closer. Still, the atmosphere was tense. Their bodies were here, but their minds were elsewhere, each haunted by thoughts of what they'd given up to get to this point, and what more might be lost before it was over. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees, Jenna found a dusty file cabinet tucked away behind an old tarp in the corner of the basement. Inside, she found something unexpected. Folders, Michael's old case files, government black ops, foreign interference, corporate espionage. One file in particular stood out. Operation Ashfield. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside were names, photos, and one startling image. A younger Arthur Collins, standing next to a U.S. senator, shaking hands, smiling. "What is this?" she muttered. Michael walked in just then, stopping cold when he saw what she was holding. "Where did you find that?" "Downstairs," Jenna said. "Why is Arthur in this file? What is Ashfield?" Michael sighed, rubbing his temple. Ashfield was a deep intelligence operation, early 2000s. Before Arthur was a billionaire, he was their handler, CIA-linked. The U.S. government used him to funnel money into proxy regimes, shell companies, offshore accounts. He helped them win wars, quiet ones. James, now listening from the stairs, looked stunned. "Are you saying the U.S. made Arthur Collins?" "Helped make him," Michael confirmed. "And when he got too big, they let him go, but he kept the infrastructure, the contacts, the shadow money. That's how the network was born." Sarah leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because it was buried," Michael said. "Even I wasn't supposed to keep a copy of that file, but now you see, this isn't just about Arthur. It's about the people who let him become who he is." The silence that followed was heavy. Jenna broke it first. "Then we don't just take down Arthur, we go for the roots." With renewed purpose, they scanned the Ashfield file and began connecting dots. This wasn't just Arthur's empire. It was a relic of failed American foreign policy, corruption and greed that had metastasized into a global conspiracy. Among the names in the file was a key one, Senator Harold Brenner, a longtime advocate for deregulation and surveillance expansion. He was still in office, still powerful, and judging by the correspondence with Arthur in the file, still involved. "If we can flip Brenner," Sarah said, "if we can make him confess publicly that Arthur was built by the U.S. government, it blows everything wide open." James nodded. "But that also paints a target on his back and ours." Michael frowned. "Brenner won't talk willingly. He's survived multiple administrations and scandals. He's loyal to the machine." "Then we make him talk," Jenna said. "We find leverage. We use the same playbook they've used against us." For the first time, they weren't just reacting. They were planning. Over the next several days, they gathered everything they could on Senator Brenner: travel logs, offshore bank accounts, real estate purchased through shell companies, a villa in Malta, a daughter attending an elite private school under a different name. Slowly, the pieces came together. Then Jenna received a tip through their anonymous secure line, a hacker named Kai, who claimed to have accessed encrypted communications between Arthur and Brenner. He wanted to help, but only in person. "Feels like a trap," Michael said immediately. Jenna looked at the message. "Maybe. But if it's real, it could be everything." James looked at her. "You sure about this?" "I'm done hiding," Jenna replied. 2 days later, in a darkened warehouse outside Philadelphia, Jenna and James met with Kai. He was young, early 20s, with a nervous energy and dark eyes that had clearly seen too much. He handed them a flash drive. "You didn't get this from me," he said, "and when this blows up, I was never here." Back at the safe house, they decrypted the files. The first video was damning Arthur Collins, speaking directly into a camera during a closed-door meeting. "We've protected Brenner for years. If he flips, it's not just me, it's the whole damn machine. You want to keep your seats in Congress. You make sure he stays quiet." Jaws dropped. Michael leaned back, stunned. We just found the kill shot. James looked around. So what now? Jenna stared at the screen, eyes cold with resolve. Now, we take it all down. As the sky turned dark outside, they knew the endgame had begun. The story had gone from one man with a sack in a bank to a war against a global web of lies. But the truth was about to come out, and this time, no one would be able to laugh it off. The fallout from the leaked Brenner files was immediate and explosive. Within 12 hours of the video being published, major news outlets had picked it up. The clip of Arthur Collins threatening Congress to protect Senator Brenner played on a loop across TV stations, live streams, and social media. It was the crack heard around the world. Billionaire power broker exposed, leaked video suggests decades of political blackmail. Deep state conspiracy, Arthur Collins linked to covert government ops. Senator Brenner under fire as whistleblower drops bombshell files. The internet exploded with theories. Protests erupted outside federal buildings, and the White House press secretary issued a carefully worded statement about an ongoing investigation into serious allegations. But behind the frenzy of headlines, the real pressure was building behind closed doors. In a high-security meeting room somewhere in D.C., Senator Harold Brenner watched the leaked video of himself being discussed like a pawn. His face paled. "We protected you," his aide said, barely above a whisper, "for years. But now—" Brenner's hands shook as he poured himself a glass of water. "We had a deal. He said he would keep my name out of it. You were the deal." The room fell silent as the weight of betrayal hit him full force. Brenner had played his role well for years, voting down oversight, approving budgets, signing off on foreign aid packages that were nothing more than laundering operations. But now he was just collateral damage, another piece Arthur was willing to sacrifice to keep the board in check, and something in him snapped. Meanwhile, at the Maryland safe house, Jenna and the others watched it all unfold like they were living someone else's life. James stood with arms crossed in front of the TV. "He's on the ropes," Michael nodded. "But wounded animals are the most dangerous." Sarah scrolled through Twitter feeds, flipping through thousands of retweets and reposts of the video. There's panic in the ranks. Senators are lawyering up. CEOs are deleting accounts. People are resigning left and right. Jenna stared at the screen silently, the glow reflecting in her eyes. "It's not over until Arthur's in cuffs. Until then, this is all noise." She was right. Arthur had been quiet since the leak. Too quiet. Then the call came. It wasn't a number any of them recognized, just a single word on the screen. Unknown. Jenna hesitated, then answered. "Hello." There was silence. "Then, you think this ends with a video?" It was him. Arthur Collins. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of voice that knew the weight of power and didn't need to raise its volume to be heard. "You think you've cornered me? You've stirred the nest, and now you've made yourself the target." Jenna didn't flinch. "The world knows who you are now, Arthur. There's no coming back from this." "You don't know the world," he said, coldly. "You know the version I allowed you to see." Click, the line went dead. And then, boom. A deafening explosion rocked the building, sending them all diving for cover. The back half of the safe house was engulfed in flames. Glass shattered. Alarms screamed. Sarah cried out, clutching her arm, bleeding from a cut near her shoulder. "Everyone out," Michael barked, grabbing a duffel and kicking down the emergency exit. They ran into the woods, coughing from the smoke, hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them the fire roared. The safe house was gone. Arthur had found them again. This time he hadn't sent goons. He'd sent a message. By midnight, they were on the move, this time deeper into Pennsylvania, to a remote cabin owned by one of Michael's oldest allies from his intelligence days. There in the dark, with smoke still clinging to their clothes and adrenaline wearing thin, they regrouped. Jenna sat by the fireplace, her mind spinning. Arthur wasn't just reacting now, he was declaring war. "We have to finish this," she said, voice rough from smoke and resolve. "We have to end him." Michael stared at the flames. "There's one last card we haven't played. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small metal case. Inside was a hard drive. "What is it?" James asked. Michael hesitated. "Insurance. Something I held on to in case Arthur ever turned on me." He plugged it into his laptop. A prompt blinked on the screen. "Deep core files. Password required." Michael typed it in. The screen lit up with a directory of files labeled Project Black Echo Campaign Payoffsia Collaborators, Evidence Vault. Collins controlled assets. It was everything. Everything Arthur had used to build his empire. Proof of murders, bribery, names of foreign leaders on his payroll, photos, audio recordings, bank transfers, secret meetings, all of it. The smoking gun. "No one survives this," Michael said quietly. "Not Arthur, not Brenner, not half the people in D.C. Sarah looked at the drive like it was radioactive. "Then we release it." "No. Redactions. No games. Let the people see it all." James added, "Truth doesn't need spin. It just needs light." Jenna nodded slowly. "Then let's light the damn match." They prepared for the biggest data drop in modern history. It wouldn't just be a story. It would be a reckoning. And when the curtain finally fell on Arthur Collins' empire, there would be nothing left standing. It was time. Every heartbeat felt like thunder in their chests as the team huddled around the single, flickering laptop in the cabin. They were bruised, burned, hunted, but alive. And in possession of something that could bring the most powerful man in America and his empire of silence to its knees. The hard drive Michael had been hiding was more than a trump card. It was an extinction-level event, the kind Arthur Collins had always feared. Jenna's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. James answered without hesitation. "We've come this far. There's no point in blinking now." Michael gave a curt nod. "Once it's out, we can't stop it. No control, no spin. It'll be raw, ugly, real." "That's exactly why we have to do it," Sarah said. "Let them choke on the truth." They activated the drop protocol, a multi-phase plan Jenna and Sarah had coded during their sleepless nights on the run. Phase 1. Encrypt and fragment the data into hundreds of bite-sized packets. Phase 2. Upload across a network of decentralized servers, dark web, cloud mirrors, torrent seeding platforms, even encrypted chat apps. Phase 3. Deliver a clean, curated index with context to vetted journalists, whistleblower protection organizations, and legal watchdogs around the world. There would be no central kill switch. No one would be able to stop it once it launched. James leaned over Jenna's shoulder. "We do this now, Arthur will know we're out of hiding. He'll know exactly where this is coming from." Jenna's eyes didn't flinch. "Good." She hit enter. Transfer-initiated lines of code scrolled across the screen like a digital waterfall. A countdown began. 93%, 97%. Then, upload complete. For a few seconds the world was silent. Then everything changed. The first publication to go live was The Guardian. Inside the empire, leaked files. Reveal decades of political manipulation, murder for hire, and government. Collusion led by billionaire Arthur Collins. Then came The Washington Post, The Intercept, Al Jazeera, Vice, Der Spiegel. Every outlet, left, right, international, published their own angles, their own versions of the story. Names were named. Audio was released. Bodies long buried, metaphorically and literally, were exhumed. It was an earthquake. The reaction was immediate. Congressional hearings were called overnight. International sanctions against companies linked to the network were announced within 48 hours. The DOJ opened a formal criminal investigation into Arthur Collins and Senator Harold Brenner. Anonymous hacktivists released Arthur's private jet logs, implicating him in secret meetings with known warlords and human traffickers. 3 corporate CEOs resigned in disgrace, 1 committed suicide, and Arthur, he vanished. No press conferences, no statements, no PR teams, just silence. Back in the cabin they sat around the fire, watching the world unravel on a tiny old TV with bunny ear antennas. Sarah stared at the screen. It worked. It's actually happening. Michael didn't look relieved. He looked haunted. We started a landslide, the kind that doesn't stop. James exhaled slowly. Yeah, but sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Jenna sat quietly for a moment, letting the truth of it all sink in. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt weightless, not safe, but seen. She turned to Michael. What happens to us now? Michael's answer was simple. We disappear. That night they burned what remained of their tracking devices, fake IDs, and backup hard drives. The cabin was left as it was. No notes, no signs, no trail. By morning, they were ghosts. 3 weeks later, the world had changed. Arthur Collins was now the subject of an international manhunt. His properties had been seized. His allies were being indicted one by one. But Jenna, James, Sarah, and Michael were gone. Some said they'd escaped to South America. Others believed they'd been quietly killed. No one could confirm it. But their story, the story of what they uncovered, had become legend. In classrooms, on podcasts, in articles and editorials, people quoted lines from the leak. One stuck out more than any. You can't kill the truth. You can only delay it. And in a downtown cafe in Chicago, a young barista with wide eyes and a fire in her chest read every word of the leak on her phone, sipping cheap coffee, her hands trembling with rage and hope. She looked up at her friend. Someone did this, she said, someone brave, and just like that, the next ripple began. 3 months had passed. The world kept turning, but it wasn't the same. Arthur Collins remained missing, officially labeled a fugitive. His photo was on billboards, Interpol red notices, and airport wanted lists. But there were no sightings, no leaks. It was like he had melted into the shadows that birthed him. Senator Harold Brenner had flipped under pressure, not out of guilt, out of survival. His televised testimony during the congressional hearing became the most watched political broadcast since the Watergate hearings. The nation watched as he confessed, eyes down, hands shaking, to years of collusion, payouts, cover-ups. We thought we were protecting the country, Brenner mumbled. But really, we were protecting power, and that is never the same thing. The country erupted in protests, vigils, and anger, but beneath all that noise, beneath the outrage and politics, no one could answer one question. Where were the people who started it all? In a small coastal village in northern Portugal, a woman named Clara tended bar at a seaside inn. She kept to herself, smiled politely, and never spoke about where she came from. No one questioned her American accent. At night, when the bar closed, she'd sit on the dock and stare out into the dark ocean. Headphones in, listening to the waves and scanning news on a burner phone, she'd learned to recharge with solar packs. Clara was Jenna, and she was watching. In a quiet town in Montana, a man named Eli Walker worked as a mechanic. Good with his hands. Barely. Spoke unless it was about carburetors or timing belts. No one knew he once hacked the U.S. Treasury. Eli was James. He lived a quiet life now, waking early, sleeping light, never staying in one place too long. He had scars on his hands and a Glock hidden beneath the floorboards, but no one would ever know what he'd done for his country, or how he nearly burned it all down. In rural Thailand, a traveling English teacher named Samantha moved from village to village, teaching children how to read, how to write, and sometimes, when the parents weren't looking, how to think critically. Samantha was Sarah. She was off-grid, unreachable, no bank account, no social media. But every so often, she'd find a cyber cafe and look up news about the network. And every time she saw someone arrested, another corporation dismantled, she smiled. The world was healing, slowly, because of them. And as for Michael, no one knew. Some said he died in the final raid. Others believed he was still out there, somewhere, in Eastern Europe, continuing the mission under a new name, taking down corruption piece by piece alone. The truth? Michael didn't care about legacy. He cared about results. Back in the States, the government launched the Collins Reform Act, a sweeping set of legislation aimed at dismantling corporate influence in politics, increasing transparency in intelligence spending, and protecting whistleblowers. For the first time in decades, people believed things might actually change, not perfectly, not fast, But change had come. At a journalism school in New York City, a professor displayed the now iconic image of the four anonymous figures, blurred and silhouetted, in front of a screen of leaked files. "We don't know their names," she told her students, "but we owe them everything." A hand went up in the back. "Do you think they're still alive?" The professor smiled. "I hope so. The world needs people like them." That night, as the city buzzed with life and noise, a package arrived. At a small independent news outlet in Brooklyn. No return address, just a flash drive inside. "More files, more truth, and a note. You thought it was over. But we've only just begun." Gin the end. It all began with one man, one sack, and a room full of people who thought they were better than him. And they laughed, until they realized they were laughing at the man who owned everything they stood on. He didn't just change the room, he changed the world. 6 months later, the world was still reeling from what had become known as the drop universities taught it. Politicians referenced. Curt protesters carried signs with quotes from the leaks like scripture. For the first time in a generation, people felt like someone had pulled back the curtain on power and actually lived to tell the story. But the dust hadn't completely settled, because revolutions don't end with a bang. They echo, and those echoes were now reaching into the darkest corners of the world. In a windowless basement, beneath a private security firm in Zurich, a man in a dark suit tapped nervously at his laptop. Sweat beaded at his temple. A dozen encrypted drives were plugged into his machine, their lights blinking like anxious heartbeats. He was one of the last, a cleaner, paid by the network to destroy anything that could trace back to Arthur Collins. But he was too late. The files were everywhere. Every backup burned, every client name indexed, every financial shell uncovered. He stared at the screen as the last of the drive's content streamed live onto a public blockchain tracker. He stood slowly, walked to the wall, and placed his ID badge on the desk beside his pistol. Then he walked out, leaving it all behind. Across the Atlantic, a high-ranking executive in a London-based global investment firm stepped onto a podium to issue a televised apology. She wore a dark dress and a steel expression. "Our organization, unknowingly, partnered with ventures linked to Arthur Collins. We are cooperating fully with authorities, and we're releasing all internal audits to the public. No more shadows, not on my watch." Applause echoed through the conference room, but outside, journalists weren't satisfied with soundbites. They wanted blood. The days of billionaires hiding behind black-tinted glass were ending, one press conference at a time. Meanwhile, in a bustling market in Morocco, a figure moved casually through the crowd. He wore sunglasses and a faded hoodie. The kind of man you'd glance at once and forget instantly. He passed a group of young men huddled around a laptop watching a subtitled clip of Senator Brenner's testimony. They were nodding, fist-bumping. One of them whispered, "We can do this too." The figure smiled, then vanished into the crowd. He wasn't just a ghost of the past, he was the whisper of what was coming next. Back in Washington, D.C., beneath the rotunda of a marble-lined hearing chamber, a new face stood at the podium. A young congresswoman, barely in her 30s, hair pulled back in a determined bun, voice steady. She was elected in the wake of the leaks. Her campaign slogan had been simple, "No more silence," and she was already shaking the foundation. Let this serve as a notice. The old ways of power are dying, and the people, the ones who've been lied to, bled dry, and kept in the dark, are watching. We won't go back. She slammed a binder of proposed anti-corruption legislation onto the table. The room went silent. History was happening again, this time on the record. In a small, nameless apartment in Buenos Aires, Jenna sat cross-legged on the floor, headphones and laptop open. She wasn't hiding anymore, not completely. She was building something new, a decentralized platform for whistleblowers, a place where truth wouldn't just be leaked, it would be protected. James coded from a distance, sending encrypted packets from an anonymous server in Canada. Sarah ghost-wrote op-eds under different aliases, seeding truth through subtle, powerful narratives in respected publications. Michael, no one had heard from him, but sometimes when a dirty official in Eastern Europe disappeared or a black site operation got exposed, Jenna would smile. She knew. Then one night, Jenna got a message on her screen from unknown secure encrypted.pro. Subject, one more door, there's one last piece you haven't uncovered. Meet me where it all began, 1 week, no traces. Be ready. Attached was a map. The location, the bank. The same one where the old man with the sack first walked in. The same place where everyone laughed until the laughter stopped. James didn't hesitate. You think it's real? Jenna nodded slowly. I think it's time to close the loop. Sarah loaded the backup drives. Then let's finish it. And so they packed their bags again. But this time it wasn't about running. It was about ending it, once and for all. The final move was coming, not just against Arthur Collins or the network, but against the system that created them and the ones who laughed. They were finally listening. It was just past midnight when they arrived. The same bank, the same marbled pillars, same polished glass doors, same smug architecture of power. But this time, it wasn't just about walking in with a sack. This time, they were walking in with the truth. Jenna stood across the street, hood up, eyes narrowed, staring at the building that started everything. James was beside her, scanning the rooftops, watching the dark windows. Sarah leaned against a light post, hands stuffed in her jacket, trying to calm the rising pulse in her throat. The streets were quiet, eerily so, as if the city itself was holding its breath. They weren't sure who sent the message, whether it was Michael or Arthur or something else entirely. But they knew one thing for sure. This was the end. The doors were unlocked, which was strange. Inside, the bank looked the same as it had the day the old man walked in. Too clean, too cold, too proud. The front desk was empty. The lights dimmed. Jenna moved first. Down the corridor past the vault toward the executive wing, and then there he was, Arthur Collins, older, thinner, paler, but still unmistakably him. He stood alone in his corner office, gazing out the window like a man who'd seen a ghost and knew it was coming for him. Jenna's voice didn't waver. We didn't expect you to show. Arthur didn't turn. You've taken everything from me. No, Sarah said from behind. You gave it away, piece by piece, for decades. Arthur finally turned to face them, his once imposing presence dimmed by exhaustion. You don't understand, he said softly. You think exposing me fixes anything? I was never the disease, I was just the symptom. James stepped forward. That's exactly why we're here, to cure the infection. Arthur looked down at the flash drive in Jenna's hand. What is that? Everything else, she said. The last of your secrets, the ones even the drop didn't cover. Ties to international weapons deals, biological research you buried, names of people still hiding behind you. Arthur laughed, a bitter, defeated sound. And what are you going to do with it? Jenna walked toward his desk and placed the drive on it. We already did. A pause. Then Arthur looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. You know they'll come for you. Not just mine. All of them. The ones who used me. The ones who let this happen.